2024 is the year of elections. More than 1 billion people are expected to head to the polls this year in what has become one of the most consequential years for politics and elections in decades. This week on Put Simply, we shine the spotlight on Indonesia, the world's third largest democracy and the largest Muslim majority country. My name is Erdem Koch.
And I'm Ozan Ibrahim.
Welcome to Put Simply. Ozan, good to be back with you here on Put Simply, our third episode. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing really well, thank you very much, and greetings from Singapore. I've got to say, I really enjoyed last week's episode where we looked at the state of the Chinese economy. I mean, how good was Julian last week?
Oh, brilliant. Just brilliant.
He just did such a great job of unpacking the complexities and giving his unique insights behind what we see in the headlines on all of the troubles that China's economy is facing. It's a great episode. If you haven't already, go and listen to it on your favorite podcast platform.
And indeed, Julian did a good job really distilling a very complicated country and a very complicated set of circumstances. And in the spirit of talking about things that were done correctly or done right, in the spirit of putting things simply, Matt Klink, a US political consultant and commentator, the previous week looked at Iowa and what the Iowa caucuses meant for the larger presidential race and who will secure the Republican nomination. Interesting things have developed since then, and I think we'll be speaking to Matt and other US experts as this election year rolls on. But speaking of election year, the US is not the only one going to the polls. The poll that is up next is Indonesia, which is our focus today.
Absolutely, my friend. And Indonesia is a super interesting country. You've got over 200 million citizens that are eligible to vote for this year's presidential elections that are going to be held on Valentine's Day, as well as their legislative elections, which is basically their parliament elections. This is the fifth presidential election since Indonesia's transition into democracy, and it's been filled with twists, turns, and plenty of drama. The campaign so far has all the makings of a bit of a soap opera or a bad episode of Dynasty, I think, and it's somewhat exposed some of the fault lines in Indonesia's fragile democracy, particularly when it comes to dynastic politics and allegations of corruption. The extremely popular two-time president, Jokowi, is, as we all know, term limited, which means that according to the Indonesian constitution, he can't run again. However, his 36-year-old son and mayor of Surakarta, Gibran Rakabuming Raka, has managed to get an exemption from the Constitutional Court in October last year, despite not meeting the constitutional rule on the minimum age rule for candidates, which I believe stands at 40. So Gibran is not only running for vice president, but in a move that's been viewed by many analysts aimed at ensuring his father's continued grip on political control, he's running besides the presidential candidate Prabowo Subianto. The interesting thing here is that Prabowo Subianto, the hard man of Indonesian politics, former general and once son-in-law of military ruler Suharto, is the very same person that President Jokowi has beaten twice already for the presidency. To add a further level of drama, Prabowo and Jokowi's son are running against the largest legislative party, the Indonesian Democracy Party of Struggle, PDIP, the very party to which Jokowi himself belongs to.
Well, I'm confused, and I'm sure I'm not alone. So let's put it simply. Let's look at the main issues, the candidates, the drama, and also talk about what the outcome means for Indonesia, for the region, and indeed the world. The stat that really stands out for me in Indonesia is that of the 205 million eligible voters, more than half of them are under 40. And that Gen Z and millennials want to see an end to the dynastic politics and corruption and really have that commitment to free speech, the environment and cost of living pressures. I mean, all that has to mean something in terms of influencing the outcome, doesn't it?
It certainly does, my friend. And in the context that elections are taken very, very seriously in Indonesia, there is a significant amount of enthusiasm throughout the country, including its 40,000 islands. On average, over 80% of eligible Indonesians vote, compared to 66% of the citizens of the United States who voted in the historic turnout election of 2020. So who will be voting on Valentine's Day? Why will they be voting? And most importantly, who will they be voting for?
Well, let's put that question to our guest this week, Abdul Malik Anwar Deen. He's the Managing Director of CT Group in Singapore, which is a global intelligence research and campaign firm. Malik has spent much of his professional life focused on Indonesia. Before his current role, he worked across professional services sector, advising businesses as well as holding senior positions within the government of Singapore. He'll help us put simply what's happening in Indonesia. Malik, welcome to Put Simply. Could you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do?
Thank you. I work for Citigroup. I'm the managing partner for Citigroup in Southeast Asia. We're a global consultancy that combines research, intelligence, campaigns, and advisory services. Prior to my appointment as managing director, I was a partner in a leading law firm in Singapore. And one of my kind of achievements for my time as a managing partner in a law firm was being the first non-lawyer in Singapore to be awarded an equity partnership in a law firm. I also held senior positions in the energy and trade sectors for the Singapore and New Zealand governments, and I also chair the Strategic Advisory Board for the International Fraud Group, which is a global network of highly skilled international lawyers who specialize in tracing, freezing, seizing, and recovering stolen assets all around the world.
Well, let's dive straight in, Malik, into Indonesia. I'm going to ask you to start by introducing the country for us a little bit. In the spirit of putting things simply, tell us a little bit about Indonesia, and then tell us about the economic and the political and social backdrop in the country that's leading up to the polls on February 14.
I think Indonesia is increasingly an important economic giant in Southeast Asia and in the world. It is the leading economic power in Southeast Asia, which is now the fourth largest trading bloc in the world. Indonesia is also, I think, in the next 4 years, will become the fifth largest economy in the world. And I think they've come a long way as well as a country. As recent as 20 years ago, a major English newspaper based in London called it 200 million people in an economy that is in a financial mess, an economy that is a big blob of nothing, which was the word used. I think you fast forward to today, for the last 9 years, it has had relative stability. It is a major contributor to a lot of deals that happen in Southeast Asia, especially where Singapore, for example, is one of the largest investors in Indonesia. Now, there's also been a democratic transition since 1998, where voting has become a celebrated way of Indonesian culture. And on 14th February 2024, Indonesia is set to hold its sixth round of legislative elections since President Suharto stepped down in 1998. Now, this is a milestone because they've managed to keep democracy going since 1998. And legislative elections are also being held at administrative levels all across the country at the same time. It's also a very large country, almost 13,000 islands. And if you take that into perspective, an election of this size is seen as an administrative exercise that is going to be held over a period of time. Eligible voters, about 205 million, I think, registered voters according to the General Election Commission. But what's really unique about this is that almost 106 million voters, or around 53% of the eligible voters, are people below the age of 40. Also, a large majority of people do not have a high school diploma and earn less than $200 a month. And I'm building this up because I think it's important to understand how social media, how some of the aspirations of this 53% of the vote will play a very big part in the Indonesian elections. Also, it's also important that the voting age is 17, so anybody over the age of 17 is eligible to vote as long as you are not a member of the military or the police.
You've painted a great picture for us, Malik, and set it up really nicely, and we're going to break it all down shortly. But put simply, how important is the outcome of this election for not only Indonesia, but also the region and the world?
I think the Indonesia, I'm taking an ASEAN-focused answer first. ASEAN is a bloc of about 680 million people with what we would call some tiger economies in the space as well. Now, a strong Indonesia will see a strong ASEAN because of the size of its domestic economy, but also the kind of influence it has on the politics of ASEAN. ASEAN is made up of some slightly smaller countries in the region, and Indonesia is often seen as the leading power, the leading voice in ASEAN. The political backdrop as well, if there is any kind of threat of violence or ethnic violence or racial violence post-election, that will see a destabilization in Southeast Asian countries as well, including Singapore. And so I think it is also in ASEAN's interest to ensure that there's a free and peaceful elections in the space. Now, I think the other thing that the Asian countries will be generally looking at is the risk of cybersecurity, as well as how much threat will come from overseas powers and whether that will affect the outcome of the elections. I think countries in Asia will also be looking at how what I would call the Gen Z voters, what they will play and how they will play a role in the Indonesian elections. And like many other countries, Indonesia is also facing cost of living issues. And that, I think, will probably be a link to job creation, opportunities creation, and hope as well. And these three kind of factors will be closely watched by the other countries that will go to the ballot box this year. It's interesting, just a fun fact, that 4 billion people out of 8 billion people in the world will go into some form of elections this year. And I think being an early election in February 14, a lot of countries will be watching the kind of voting habits of what I call the Gen Z or the millennial vote.
Let's drill down a little bit more on the election itself. You've mentioned that over 200 million people are going to the polls on Valentine's Day, that Indonesians take their elections and their civic duty very, very seriously. Can you talk us through a little bit around how this actually works? Because I understand that Indonesia has over 40,000 islands, and what type of system do they use? How do they coordinate it? Because it sounds like one hell of a logistical nightmare, if you ask me.
It is. Just to add on to the 200 voters, you still have got 1.8 million overseas voters from 120 jurisdictions around the world. So you've got a mail system of voting for 1.8 million Indonesians who are outside Indonesia. You're absolutely right. It's a massive undertaking due to the country's size, population, geography as well. Getting to voting centers may take days, weather patterns, floods as well. So on February 14th, Indonesia will do these things. They will elect a president, a vice president, and also there are 20,000 representatives to national, provincial, district parliaments from a pool of about, I think, around 250,000 candidates. The election utilizes a direct presidential election system, which allows the Indonesian public to choose the highest political office holders. In the Suharto days, it was a party-like hybrid model where the biggest party in the legislative would then elect or nominate the president. So this has been in place for the last 5 election cycles. If no presidential tickets wins the majority of votes, which means they cross that 50% line, the top 2 finishers will participate in a runoff election to be held on 26th of June 2024, the country, of course, upholds the principles of one man, one vote. But there are still some parts of the archipelago that still uses traditional communal voting systems according to villages. And I think this time round, there will be also extra efforts to ensure fair and transparent elections. But I also think the security forces of Indonesia will attempt and are in the process of trying to ensure that post-election violence is kept to a minimal as well. I think in the last couple of elections, there were little hotspots of trouble after the elections. But I think this time around, there will be an extra effort by the security forces to ensure that the elections are fair, that post-election violence is kept to the minimal as well. But what's important to know is that it's a system where you have to cross the 50% mark. And if you do not cross the 50% mark, then the first two candidates, finishing candidates, will go into a runoff that will take us into June 26.
So who's actually running for the office of president, Malik? What's the differences between the candidates and how are they faring in the polls?
There are three main teams running for the presidential elections. One thing, you will find that their vision statements are all very similar. They all call for a fair and progressive and sustainable Indonesia. It's usually just a play of words if you look at their different vision statements. In the first camp, you've got Prabowo, the defense minister, who lost the last two elections to President Jokowi, very closely as well. He was a Kopassus, which is a special forces general, used to be married to one of Suharto's daughters, so an ex-military man who held the position of defense minister and is now being aided by President Jokowi's son, Gibran, who is a mayor in Solo. And Pak Prabowo, just to give you a background on Prabowo, Pak Prabowo is also well known to have an explosive temper and has tendencies to be off script. So if you look at some of his comments about Ukraine at the recent Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, you'll realize that it is in direct opposite of what the Indonesian government stand on Ukraine is. So he has a tendency to be off script, and I think it's cost him, the elections that he contested with recently. However, this election, he has been rebranded as a patriot, a fun-loving, grandfatherly figure, but one with a strong nationalist message. So his campaign strategy has been built around security and defense and being a strong leader. His use of social media as well has been what I call excellent. He combats any kind of criticism about him through social media channels. So, for example, there have been rumors circulating about his health, on whether he had any kind of health issues, whether he had a stroke. And he combats that by releasing videos of himself dancing at rock concerts, dancing at campaigns. And if you look up his Instagram account or his TikTok account, it's just him dancing. And he's kind of created a whole cult of dancing with that. And I think that kind of addresses that whole rumor spreading around that he's not fit enough, or he is 72 years old and he won't be able to see out 2 terms as president. The next camp is Anies and his vice president Muhaimin. Anies is a 54-year-old former university chancellor, former education minister, and a very effective governor of Jakarta. He comes from a family of Muslim political activists. He was educated in America. And while governor of Jakarta, he provided school meals for the poor and was also very quick in responding to the COVID-19 crisis, and is well-versed in foreign affairs. He kind of fashions himself after Suharto to a certain extent. If you look at his campaign videos and all that, he's got the songko on, the dark suits and the red tie, and he's trying to build if you're campaigning and you're looking for the candidate that looks most presidential, I think Anies comes across to the masses as someone who carries himself in a very presidential manner. And I think his track record during COVID as well put him in a very strong ground, especially in voters in Java and in the Jakarta region. In the third camp, there is Ganjar and his vice presidential candidate Mahfud. This candidacy is supported by Megawati, who is the daughter of Indonesian founding partner Sukarno. Ganjar had a very successful two-time term as governor of Central Java. He's kind of positions himself as a man of the people. And it's also important to note that by Indonesian standards, he does not come from any political dynasty. So he doesn't have a family background in politics or in business. Most polls at the moment place the Prabowo camp in the lead, and Ganjar and Anies kind of switching between second and third. So right now, some polls put Ganjar at about 24%, and they put Anies at about 21%, and Prabowo about 43%. What is consistent, though, is that the polls are all pointing to Prabowo being the lead between 43 to 48%, and Ganjar and Anies kind of switching positions depending on which poll you look at. I think an important point here, gentlemen, is that Indonesian polls tend to have very small sample sizes, can also be very politically motivated, and some of these polls don't cover the different parts of the islands as well. So if you look at most Indonesian polls, they survey about 1,000 people. And of course, if you go to places like Java, you'll get certain results that favor certain candidates. But having said that, I think the general feeling is that Prabowo is in the lead. Now, the key question is that can Prabowo achieve the 50% of the vote in order to avoid a runoff situation against the number two candidate? And it is really in his interest to avoid that, purely because a Ganjar-Anies coalition for the runoff will suddenly negate the kind of advantage he has at the moment. So I think that he is in the lead, and the question is whether he can achieve the 50% to avoid a runoff.
Malik, there's been significant criticism of the economic spending during President Jokowi's time in office, and that much of what he has built has burdened state-owned construction companies with dangerous levels of debt. What are the candidates' position on infrastructure spending, particularly in the context of the planned relocation of the capital? What type of solutions have they presented to the Indonesian public?
I think President Jokowi has presided over a period of large economic spending on infrastructure. Here is a fact. He has built more airports, ports, and toll roads than all the former presidents of Indonesia put together. So while it may be true that this has saddled state-owned and construction companies with debt, he's also celebrated by the business community and the general population for this large infrastructure bill. So there's a lot of support by the business community, who are, of course, beneficiaries of contracts, and the people who feel that connectivity between the 13,000 islands is something that will help pull Indonesia together for the future. And of course, that high-speed rail between Jakarta and Bandung, the MRT, has garnered a lot of positive feedback from Indonesians. From the candidates' perspective, I think it's very clear that the exchange that Gibran for vice president has meant that Prabowo has come out openly and said that he will carry out the plans for Nusantara, which is the new capital city in Kalimantan, and will see that through. The only candidate who has come out and said openly that the plan for the smart city will increase massive deforestation, threaten the habitat of endangered species, uproot homes of indigenous communities, has been Anies. Both the other two leading candidates, Prabowo and Ganjar, have openly come out and said that this is a mega project. This will relieve the stress of Jakarta, which is really a valley. It's overbuilt, polluted, and that moving the capital city is something that will help the country in the long run. And also, they're talking about building Nusantara as a sustainable forest city that puts environment at the heart of its developments. And they have an ambitious plan of being carbon neutral by 2045. So the reality is, I think if you see a Prabowo government or a Ganja government, the Nusantara, the city in Kalimantan, will be built. I think if Anies comes through somehow, you will see a lot of changes to what the new plans for the new city will look like.
It's fair to say there's been quite a bit of drama, hasn't there, Malik, in the lead up to these elections, particularly the selection of the candidates, the interventions of the Constitutional Court. What's happening?
So the drama started with the intervention of the Constitutional Court that resulted in Gibran being nominated as Prabowo's running mate. This threw the whole political ecosystem up into the air, as President Jokowi has always been supported by Megawati and Indonesia's largest party, PDIP, which she heads. What this has done is this has kind of split the vote in Central Java that would normally go to Ganja. So the split vote has cost Ganja a couple of percentage points, and also, brought some of the what I call 35-year-old male voters in Central Java to the Prabowo camp. This has enraged Megawati, and privately, for example, when PDIP celebrated its anniversary 2 weeks ago, Jokowi was not invited to the PDIP event. President Jokowi has also been accused of undoing a lot of his good work over the last 9 years around this action. There's also an added complexity to this. So he went to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court is seen as a check on executive powers in Indonesia. The constitutional judge that ruled in favor of the president to reduce the voting age is also the president's brother-in-law. So there has been a lot of accusations that this smells like nepotism. This will take Indonesia back to the days where high levels of corruption and the courts were not free. The other thing that's very, very interesting also is that I think this whole campaign is being played out in social media. I was quite shocked to hear that Indonesia has the second largest TikTok subscribers in the world after the US. And as a result of that, whoever wins the social media campaign, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, will win the hearts and minds and will influence the outcome of the election. The other controversy that's kind of brewing around is, people are asking the question, why is President Jokowi doing this? He's done really well, really popular. Why is he not being free and independent at the end of his term? And there's some speculation that this could be because he wants to keep his influence post-election, which is, and he's looked at SBY and SBY's family, the previous president, and seen how they've been sidelined. And I think he wants to keep his relevance in Indonesia post-election. But I think the biggest controversy still has been the kind of installation of Gibran as vice president. I think that has kind of raised a lot of questions in the eyes of Indonesian society, where it's very patriarchal. So you spend your time building your career up before you go into politics or you get into a position. And a lot of people were shocked that he went to a constitutional court and the ruling judge is his brother-in-law. And I think people are still reeling from that. Whether that will affect the Prabowo camp remains to be seen, but the polling numbers look like he's actually swung some of the PDIPs or Megawatis and Ganja's stronghold in Central Java with this move.
I just want to pick up on something that you mentioned earlier in terms of the significant part of the voting population being below 40 years of age. And we understand that also significantly more than half of the electors are actually women. There's two questions here. What role are these segments likely to play in the outcome of the election? And how have you seen the different candidates appealing to each of these segments? And also, you mentioned the dancing on Instagram and TikTok and the large influence TikTok in particular has in Indonesia. Can you go a little bit more deeper into what type of role the social media platforms and the campaigning on social media has played in the elections, and how, in your opinion, is it going to impact the outcome?
Let's start with the women question first. I think if you look at the data is pointing to me that actually slightly more than half of the voters are women. As a result, you see that all the parties have met the mandated nationwide quota of 30% of women who are seeking election. The current speaker is a woman. There are a number of lawmakers have risen from 20% in 2019, from less than 10% before 1999. Because there are more women voters than male voters, I think issues around education, cost of living, and the whole idea of hope that my children will be able to do better in a modern Indonesia will be key determining factors when they choose the next president. As a result of that, you'll see that Prabowo, Ganjar, Anies, job creation is a very big part of their campaign mandate, talking about 15 million jobs over the last 5 years. The numbers may vary for a couple of million, but everybody has made that kind of top of the agenda. One thing I think these three candidates should be wise to do is do not discount the role Indonesian women may have in kind of swinging the voting habits of their husbands, boyfriends, sons, because like in a lot of other Asian societies, while women may not be at the forefront of a family unit, they call the shots when it comes to the management of money and play a very influential role in the decisions the family takes economically as well. So cost of living issues, because most of the women would handle the household expenses, the food costs will also be something that I think the three candidates need to do better at. The other thing I think that it's probably not heard of, there have been accusations being flung around, but I think the issues of nepotism, corruption will rank very high among voters under the age of 40 and women voters. I think the candidate that creates an illusion of hope in dealing with corruption, the illusion of hope in dealing with employment, and the illusion of hope for a better future will do well with the kind of segment of voters who are under 40 and women voters as well. Now, the use of social media has been something new, I think, in Indonesia, where all three candidates have been scrambling to ensure that their messaging on social media will reach as many people as possible. It is possible to actually say now that perhaps as much as 70% of the voting public, not only the young voters, the voting general voters in particular, probably get all their information from social media. As a result of that, you will notice if you check out Prabowo, you check out Ganjar, you check out Anies's Instagram, TikTok accounts, short, very tight, very punchy videos are being currently produced. Key statements like the famous Trump, "Make America Great Again," you'll find that a lot of these guys are coming with very short, punchy campaign slogans so that there is brand recall as well. And in one particular candidate, I think Prabowo has to be singled out as having expertly used either advice or under advice or expertly used advisors to kind of craft his social media campaign. I'll give you an example. In one of the presidential debates, he was criticized by Anies for his record as defense minister. And when the host of the program asked Anies, upon 100, what would you rate Prabowo's term as president? He said 11 upon 100. And the video then went back, the cameras went back to Prabowo, and it looked like he was about to tear. and he looked left, looked right, like as if, someone had stabbed him in the heart by making such an accusation. Next day, turned the video around, very sad, dramatic music in the background, him looking really upset, hearing about that question. But that was only part it showed. And that video went viral almost immediately. And like a lot of Asian countries, you've got suddenly the sympathy towards Prabowo, a 72-year-old man who served his country all his life, being criticized by a candidate for his service to the country. I think it's short videos like that, punchy videos like that, has kind of swung the electorate to Prabowo as well. And the dancing, I think that got rid of a lot of the accusations that we flung, whether he was fit enough to be president. The other videos where he comes up very nicely is his journeys to meeting common people, the way he takes messages and makes them short, punchy, and visual with music has also worked well. The other thing, of course, is that he's also the only candidate that has kind of used other influences to endorse him. And in the Western idea of endorsements through influencers, you get fashion endorsers, this endorser. He has actually gone to business people who have a very big social media presence and got them to run his videos, got them to endorse his videos, got them talking about him as well. And I think that this whole idea of using celebrities, using rock bands, using business influencers to kind of carry his message forward has seen a big change in how Indonesian politics has played out. I think this is something that's new. That's something that will be looked at as a case study when all this is over, to look at how much social media actually swung the election campaign as well.
I guess President Biden's campaign advisors are looking very closely to see whether he should be appearing in a few TikTok videos, no doubt.
So come February 14, Malik, what is going to be top of mind for voters, do you think, as they cast their ballots? What are the differences, I guess, of the candidates that will stand out for people?
I think the first thing that Indonesians will think about is continuity. Indonesia had a rough ride after President Suharto sat down. Bloodshed, religious tensions, racial tensions, terrorism, different forms of Islamic terrorist groups coming out of Indonesia, security threats. I think they want to avoid all that. So I think the voter who comes out the idea of which candidate will provide me with the opportunities or the growth that I've seen over the last 9 years will be the candidate that takes it. I also think you cannot rule out things like job creation, education, poverty alleviation, and jobs from the equation as well. The similarity between the Indonesian elections and other global elections will continue to be about cost of living. It will continue to be bread and butter issues. It will continue to be about jobs, especially in the post-COVID environment. And I think corruption as well, how you deal with corruption. My concern is that, while a lot of these candidates have put up numbers about how many jobs they're going to create over the next 5 years, no one has actually kind of explained how they're going to achieve this. I think also the last 2 weeks of the election campaign before February 14 is going to be critical, because I think there's this mass of voters who will decide in the last 2 weeks of election on who they put the cross around the ballot box. And whoever swings that over the last 2 weeks will be important. The other factor, which I don't see much of the candidates influencing, is the 1.7 to 1.8 million overseas voters as well. How they swing or how they vote, I think will have an influence, a small influence, but an influence on election day. The critical thing for if I was Prabowo would be, how would I get past the post on February 14th? Because the alternative and I'm just speculating here, the alternative could possibly a coalition between the other two candidates to face him in a runoff. And then he runs a danger of kind of resetting all the support that he has got over the last couple of months campaigning in Indonesia. So I think cost of living, I think jobs, I think hope, and I kind of round this off with hope. It's very much who will make sure that my kids, I make less than $200 a month. I have a middle school education. I don't have a high school education. I want my kids to do better. And how do I do that? And the candidate who can offer me that platform without revolution would be the candidate I vote for. I think that would be the psyche of the Indonesian people.
Malik, we can't let you go without asking a few questions and putting you on the spot, as we do on Put Simply. What is your prediction for the outcome of the election?
I'm going to make two predictions for you, so two for the price of one. I think that Prabowo and Gibran will cross the 50% mark on February 14th. That will then mean that there will be no runoff on to June 26th. However, if there is a runoff and Anies and Gibran go into a coalition, I suspect that might possibly do the trick to nick a very closely called elections.
You've heard it here on Put Simply. There will be no runoff. So we're holding you to that, Abdul Malik.
Yeah, that's why I gave you two. Like a good consultant, I gave you two options here.
Exactly.
Well, Malik, we asked you to put something incredibly complicated simply for us, and you've done exactly that. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And that's been this week's episode of Put Simply. I've been your host, Erdem Koch.
And I'm Ozan Ibrahim.
Be sure to hit the subscribe button on your favourite podcasts platform and follow Oroku Group on LinkedIn for all the up-to-date information. Until next time, thanks for listening.